Good morning, gut buckets.
From around the world to your backyard.
Zuzu Radio.
Welcome to Zuzu Radio. I'm your host, Bryan, and I'm here with
Bryan.
Roger. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to talk about Harvest Some Recordings, which is a local record label that's been cranking out albums for 20 years now. I tried to prep some kind of an introduction, but it's a little tricky to summarize what it is, you know?
Yeah, it is.
But I did have the pleasure of listening to your conversation with Chris on 716 The Sound, and so I feel like I have a better sense for it now, but would you be down to share sort of how the label came to be a thing?
Yeah, so initially, as we were through a set of circumstances, I was recording at Mark Nozowitz's house, and we made a record which eventually turned into The Old Sweethearts, our band. And as we were putting out that first CD, we just wanted an imprint of some kind to put on there is really how it began. In doing that, though, we were having conversations between ourselves, our friend Donnie Kutzbach, and we had other people that were starting to go to Mark's, and we could sense that, like, all right, well, there's maybe something going on that we could do. Should we kind of try to turn this into maybe a label? But it initially started just as a name for the imprint, to put that out. And Mark's studio was, he referred to as Harvest Studios. We were both into the Neil Young Harvest record, and in particular, when I went over there, the back cover of Harvest, or the gatefold, actually, where they're all playing inside Neil's studio, was something that I had a strong attachment to, and going over to Mark's, it felt like a version of that. And so I think that's kind of how that name started. And then I think it was Donnie that came up with Sum, S-U-M, and that was how that was born.
Tell me about Mark's studio. I'm really curious, what was the vibe? What did it look like? Was it out? I think, did you say it was in Orchard Park? It's like somewhere outside of the city, right?
Yeah, out in Orchard Park in this big old barn of his folks. And he had built up a small little practice space / studio built off the side of it. And inside in the main barn was like an old stage. And initially when we went there, that's where we recorded, was on this barn stage. And then like the other half has like all this great like collection of stuff over the years that his dad had, and jukeboxes, an old bar. It was a really awesome spot. And then after that, initially, him doing some recordings in there, it eventually moved into just inside and being concentrated in the small little studio lab in there on the side.
And was Mark acting as an engineer or a producer or a little bit of both? Like, was he imprinting sort of a sound on some of the artists that came through that made it seem like putting this under an umbrella would make sense, or was it all sort of varied?
I don't think he was intending to make any kind of imprint on it. It was primarily just to record the bands, but just given who he is and sort of the relationship with the people he was working with, being open to, things that he might offer, I think it started to seep in. And because when we first started, it was just me and my friend Jeff playing drums. And we built it up from the ground up. And it started from the expectation being a really simple sort of folkish record to building it up into full band stuff. And Mark started playing a lot of those extra instruments and organs and pianos and all that stuff. So I don't know if that led to other people being like, oh, like, I know that you played all this stuff. Like, do you have any ideas? I can't speak to exactly how that all happened, but it was just kind of his methodology, I think. And some of the the people that were coming in there, we were becoming friends with, and Mark would say like, oh, so and so, Sleeping Kings of Iona is in here making this record, and we just all kind of got into it. And I mean, I don't even remember how we started including them in it, so long ago. It just, one conversation led to another. Hey, this band like is pretty cool. We should put it out on Harvest Some. It's like, yeah, okay, that sounds great. It sounds cool. It kind of grew out of that sort of casual
it's interesting to hear someone whose ambition is to start a label, because most artists are carrying kind of a heavy load as it is, and this seems to introduce sort of more business into the equation, so to speak. And a lot of creative people I know, kind of myself included, I'm not as interested in that side,
Yeah.
So tell me, when you say we're going to make a label, is it really just sort of about curating content that speaks to you and forming friendships and sort of like, oh, I love what they're doing, I want to lift them up? Was it more of that, or was it more of like we're trying to churn a profit out of this?
The former.
Yeah.
That was really the main goal. Was we felt like these bands were doing something unique. Each one was cool, and we were all related on some level. So it made sense to sort of stitch it all together. We really thought our goal was, I think, just to have that stamp of Harvest Some be something that you could see either on a CD or a show poster and know like, oh, this is a Harvest Some show. These three bands are on it. And we hoped if the bands we put on that were good enough that could be a name that people could kind of count on. So if you even if you only knew one out of the three bands, we were hoping if you saw Harvest Some Presents or the logo, you're like, oh, cool. I have a blast when I go to those shows. I was at one last month. We were really kind of shooting for that. The sort of financial end, we were all broke and just, working whatever job. So there was no capital, or there was no big dreams, or, no business plan. So it was a very, let's see what we can do. So, when we put out Arms of the Town from the Sweethearts, we were able to take that money, fund the Iona pressing, and then when they were done, they returned that money, and I believe we were able to do that with a third record, and we were like, if we can keep that going, that would be nice to some degree. We didn't really keep up on that as things kind of grew, out after that. It would have been too much anyways. Everyone became sort of responsible for their own projects, but Mark was still typically recording most or all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Ryan Besh was doing the artwork. So we were able to kind of provide a cohesive recording and artwork plan for them to help keep it kind of glued together to some degree. And that was kind of as far as our plans went. And that's pretty much how it's continued since. So Ryan Besh will call it the label / not a label, because it's a little bit of all those things. It's a little bit of just an imprint, partially a label, partially a show promotion imprint. It's a little bit of all that stuff.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a collective in a way, or sort of like a promotional company where you're offering this full range of service, like if you need art, if you need session players, if you just need to track, if you in some ways maybe you see someone you like and you go, okay, we'll put you under a Harvest Some banner, and then we can kind of push you a little bit that way.
Yeah, you try to lift, ape together strong is kind of the idea.
Yeah.
And hopefully the history of all that stuff over time, back then we weren't sure how long any of this would last, but the goal was like, each thing that got added would hopefully be building together of like, oh, okay, this Iona record is great. We love going to their shows. Oh, there's this other new, record coming from this band. Great. And it would keep kind of laddering up was the hope,
Very cool. What if someone is listening to this and they say, hey, this guy Roger sounds cool. I like Harvest Some. I want to sign to Harvest Some. Is that a thing, or what does it take to become a part of the family tree? Or is the family tree sort of closed in this sense, and it's like the bands that are there are the ones that are there?
It's an interesting question, and it's one that me and Ryan have talked about recently. The question of who and should we bring outside bands into the fold now? Because we've realized, like, well, as 20 years has gone on, things go up and down. The sort of roster will sort of shrink and expand within our sort of family, at different times. And it's sort of a question that we've had to ask ourselves, like, well, if we wanted to do that, what exactly do we have the power to do to really make it worth their while right now?
Yeah.
The days of the sort of in-house record with Mark, Bryan does the artwork, we'll, do X, Y, Z. That doesn't exist in the same way anymore, so it would be a different equation. But it's something that we are curious to do. At the same time, I've kind of felt now that we're at the 20-year mark and looking back on it, there is that aspect of this really just being more of like a family of bands. And so that feels really special. And I'm kind of torn between, do you bring outside things into that when you've sort of maintained this for so long?
Yeah.
It's like the first 20 years were, Godfather 1, and like bringing in new people, it's going to change that, know. So I don't know. We're open to it. I would say if anyone hears this and is interested, send links to your stuff. We would love to hear it. Anyway,
cool.
And what the future holds as far as what the label might look like, in the next year or two from here. Not 100% sure what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, milestones are weird, right? It's like they kind of provoke a deeper response. Like, it's only one more year than 19, but 20, you hear the number and you're like, whoa, instills reflection, And so, does it feel like 20, or does it feel like less or more?
Both at the same time. In some ways, it's shocking when because when you take 20 and you're like, well, we were all like 23 when we started, so you're like, shit, that part, isn't the most fun. But on the other hand, not a lot of things make it to 10 years.
For real, yeah. Definitely.
Let alone 20. So there's definitely a sort of like very grateful pride that we have, that I have over it.
We're celebrating for sure.
Yeah, because that core group is mostly still intact in some other band. It's not like, oh yeah, those first 5 years, that's all gone and it turned into something else. It's still, for the show coming up, there's 8 bands playing, but there's only 15 people that make up those 8 bands.
Right, yeah.
And because they've all just kind of been interchanging and mingling and making new bands, and, there's a lot of sharing of members. So, it feels great. I mean, it's, you think back 20 years, there's a lot of things that you can't remember. It usually takes a room full of a couple people to kind of talk, like, oh, yeah. Oh, they fill in different gaps, you know what I mean?
Right,
All the things you've completely forgot about. And it's weird. 'Cause I think back to that and I feel in some ways, half of a different person, when you're 23, 24. So it's strange to look back at those things. But again, it was all going so quickly and we were staying active and busy that it has gone by really fast, and it feels like it's only been like, this has all happened in the last like 5-10 years, right?
Yeah.
At most, time has this weird way of stretching and shrinking that it's really kind of hard to really grab onto and really know what it means,
to really sense it moving along.
Yeah.
I think I counted for you guys something around 58 to 60 releases. Does that sound right about there?
Sounds about right, because there's about, I think, 33 like full records or EPs, and then there's a handful of there's a bunch of singles and different sort of smaller projects that are sort of like has a slightly different, like there's the HS catalog numbers, and then there's the HSS, which are the single catalogs. So
I see.
Separated that way. Besh is the master catalog guy. He keeps track of all that stuff and keeps it straight. Especially when one of us randomly puts out a single without notifying anyone. He's like, oh, I got it. Yeah, I gotta go in there and put that number in. Or like sometimes in the past, one of the bands would claim a number, and he'd be like, no, that's not it. Like, because this is coming out and I already had that marked. So it's actually this number. So yeah, he's
The master bookkeeper. Good to have a guy on the details.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
When you look at those releases, do you see the label as having different eras? Like in your mind, do you sort of group it in a certain way? And if so, what are the factors that influence the groups?
Yeah, there is. I kind of see it. I think there's sort of like 3 different eras at this point. That initial kind of 5-year period was primarily those initial 5 bands. You had the Sweethearts, Iona, Besnyo, Vera, Johnny Nobody. Mm-hmm. And they were the main thing going. You get into like 2008, 2009, that's when, the Sweethearts are gone, Vera's gone. Iona's about to be done, I think, around that time. And then the Orphans kind of come into the picture, and Mark starts the Locks. And that's sort of like this middle period where we had these new formats, those same members that kind of stuck together and formed some different bands. So those initial bands are starting to disband, and sort of, I guess you would call like the classic era, for lack of a better term, is in that kind of first 5 years. Then you have this big chunk in the middle where everyone was kind of jumping into new bands, and that was sort of like the Star Trek: The Next Generation period, you know? And then there was kind of like a weird period in the middle, around like 2015, where Mohawk Place is closed now.
Yeah.
And there's other life things going on with everyone. And it seemed to be a strange period of not being sure exactly what to do. And because we have other priorities in our lives for a while, some of these bands aren't really able to stay together or stay active. There's some gaps in records. Some people, members are like in our band and the Orphans, some people decided to hang it up, and it took a little while to figure out what the band was going to be. Mm-hmm. So there was some rebuilding. And then once we got through that, we're now in this sort of third era that started, I kind of feel like, right before the pandemic. And then once we got through that, what's emerged after that is now, in the present, this sort of third stage.
Third wave Harvest Song.
Yeah, third wave, sure.
When you hit this gap period, which I think you described it as like a 3-year hiatus where there weren't albums really coming out, was there this sense of like, maybe it's over? Or were there people that were like, no, it's not over, it's going on?
There was, I think there were definitely some not necessarily conversations, but maybe questions or comments from some of us of like, is this still a thing? Like, what's going on with this now? Like, what are we doing? And there was never any sort of major decision, or it wasn't that big of a deal. It just, I know me and Ryan were like, no, this goes on forever. We've come this far. We just weather these storms, and whatever comes out the other end is what it'll be, and thankfully we did, because here we are, and there's still new records coming out, and so, but yeah, it was a weird time, because within that, even before that sort of period where we kind of hit the sort of lowest point, there's people have some families starting, they have some different careers going on. There may have been some health things going on within the bands and their families, and it was that typical, people are in their mid to late 30s where that's the kind of shit that's going on.
Yeah, you're sort of settling into life.
Yeah, and so it inevitably needed, I think, sort of a little bit of a gap to sort of, restart itself a little bit. A hibernation period, maybe.
Yeah, to recharge.
Yeah, and because there were diminished clubs, there weren't as many clubs. We lost a big one with Mohawk at that time, and it wasn't even just that, but all that group of people where we had spent so much time with, they all sort of went their separate ways too. All those bartenders and the sound people, and that was a real that was the beginning of that sort of chapter closing for everyone. And other bands, not even just Harvest Sun, but I think in the scene in general, there were other bands that were sort of calling it a day around that time, and you weren't really sure what kind of new bands were coming up necessarily, and it was a weird period. Just didn't really know what was happening.
No, absolutely. I kind of remember a sense that it was like a changing of the guard. And when Mohawk closed, this first iteration of Mohawk closed, it seemed as though a lot of shows went sort of underground. Like basement venues were really big for a couple of years where we didn't really have places to play, it seemed like. And in that scene, all these other artists came about that I really had not heard of or had not connected with yet. And so, it does seem to be in that particular time in Buffalo's musical history, there was this sort of like turning over the soil, you know? But for Harvest Sun, you guys persevered. And I guess I'm curious, kind of, was there an album that you said, restarted it for you where it was like, okay, we're putting this out and this is the beginning of the third wave?
I'd have to look it up for sure because I can't remember all the dates, but I know at least for us and the Orphans, during that time, Strange Acres, which was sort of half of Vera originally, and then Molly from Iona was singing with them. They had their thing going, and they put a record out, and they were playing like CMJ, and they were doing some touring. They had that thing going on while we were sort of dead. and that's when everything was kind of like disconnected, and for me, it's easier for me to kind of remember like, oh, well, when we finally found our footing again a little bit, we were playing as a 3-piece eventually with Andy, me, Mike, and Andy, just to kind of get it going again. And when he had to step away, that's when Matt and Dave came along. And so when we finished up an EP that had started with Andy, and that kind of started to get us, all right, well, we finally have caught up and passed this gap in, the records, and now we can make another record and we can, we feel strong again. I think then Johnny Nobody put a record out, I think right around that time. And that kind of was like, all right, we've got a couple. And then Bear Hunter put one out. And that's, so we had like 3 albums that came out, I think in a pretty close time within that year or so.
I see. A little momentum.
And yes, it's finally started to come back.
Nowadays, is there a home base studio for Harvest Sun, or how's that work?
No, nowadays everyone kind of goes where they're most comfortable, and they work on their records with who they most like working with, whether it's making it at home, whether it's doing it with Mark, other people. We've been working with John Angelo a lot. We work with Mark Hahn. We've done to some different places and kind of trying out different things. Just whatever works for everyone. Whatever's gonna. To me, it's whatever I hope will get like the records done. It's really the main thing. You just need them to get done and out.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but for me, the most rewarding part of the process of making any music is when you're done.
Yeah.
And it's like all of the anxiety and fear and self-doubt of trying to get it right is over, and now it's just the book is closed.
Well, and then you can have all new anxieties and stressors.
Exactly. I was going to say it starts right over again. You're
Yeah,
like
yeah.
back to square one
Yeah.
and building again. So I definitely get that.
Yeah.
I know you said that this might rely on other people sort of jogging your memory, but let's just throw it in a general way. For you personally, is there a moment that stands out in these 20 years of really effort, you'd call it, in music? And I hate to be morbid and frame it like this, but when you're on your deathbed, right,
Yeah.
and the Harvest Sum chapter flashes before your eyes, what will you see there?
A lot, thankfully, because everyone's done a lot. I mean, I think those first couple years is probably where I would go to first, just because we were all of that age where we had nothing better to do than to hang out with each other, make records, practice, play shows, go to each other's shows, go to other band shows, go out. Like, we were out like 4 nights a week, nothing else. We weren't doing anything else. We all had jobs that we didn't care about, and we were just living out there together, doing all that and meeting other people, meeting all these other bands that we became friends with. That's the easy one to go to. It was just, it's sort of the stuff that you make movies or write a story about. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
that's when it all happens.
The
When you're
glory
like
days.
24 and you have nothing else going on but just like living together and doing all this awesome fun stuff and like laughing your ass off
Yeah, man.
and all that stuff.
Yeah, I feel that. I've often said that one of the reasons I started my label was just in an effort to have a less intimidating way to approach people that I liked and collaborate with them.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're making this banner under which you can say, hey, you want to jump on Harvest Sum? You want to work with Steak and Cake or whatever? It's just easier than being like, hey, do you want to make a song together?
Hi, I'm rando on the internet. You want to come over to my house and make? It's like, what?
Yeah.
You can go to you can look up. Oh wow, okay. So there's because when did Steak and Cake start? It was like 2011.
11, yeah.
11. Okay. So it's a big chunk of time, and so yeah, they can see, and there's a trust sort of there that they can look at and say, okay, this is something I can get into, and
Right. Yeah. Because that's the biggest part of the work that I think we kind of do when we're lifting up other artists is they need to sort of trust that we're working in service of their vision and not trying to like co-opt it.
yeah,
And sometimes if you have sort of an archive that you can show, hey, this is how I operate, there's more trust there. Totally
for
true.
sure.
Do you feel like the bands under Harvest Sum influence each other musically? Do you feel like there is some bleed between what Sleeping Kings is doing and what you're doing, or does it seem like totally separate? I know very different sounds,
I wouldn't. I would say in the way whenever, like, I remember going to Sleeping King shows and just loving the way they created a vibe. It'd be lights out. They would have shit on stage that was like glowing, and
Yeah, man.
and it just made a whole separate thing where you're like, I'm at something cool. This isn't just like a band playing on a stage. I used to really love that. And, over the years, there were just always records that these bands made that I just thought were really good. So it just kind of helped, like, oh, man, that's great. Like, I can't wait till we get to do our next one.
Yeah.
Just that sort of healthy momentum. I wouldn't say competition, but more like it's just inspiration of like, oh, that's great what they're doing. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It makes me excited to make something new too. I would say that's how we influenced each other.
Yeah, a lot of times when you see someone achieve a thing, then it seems easier for you to achieve it at some point. You kind of witness it happen that way.
Or if someone's dragging their feet on getting something done and then they pop one out like, oh shit, like, all right, well, let me get one out too, so that we can have a couple things out, at the same time. I wish that we had even more output. Some projects just naturally in their own little worlds have taken longer to either complete or to just get in there and get started in the first place. So,
Yeah.
I wish I had more control over that to help make that happen.
Right.
But that's how life goes. You just have to sometimes roll with what you can do.
Yeah, when
you
you
can do it.
Right.
Crackin' up. Crackin' up. Crackin' up.
to just throw this out because I was looking through the artists and I noticed one outlier on the Bandcamp page, and that is a dear friend and fantastic artist, Nick Gordon.
Yeah.
I think he put one album out through Harvest Sum. How did that come to be?
You'd have to, that was one of those funny ones where he just ended up going to Mark's one day, and they were recording, and if I remember correctly, I think Mark plays a ton on that and helped him with that.
Don't have cocaine. Try a cup of coffee, you know it won't feel the same. Won't feel as good, but sometimes no one should. Sharing some meaning, words we use and songs we sing, they aren't the same. What they mean.
That's one of those ones where you're like, oh, cool, this is happening. Like, I didn't even know that it was happening. But yeah, we're going to put, that'll be a Harvest Sum one. That's going to be great. Sweet album. Yeah, he's great. That's one of at that time, there were some of those, like we had, like Bill Nihil had a record.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Nick Gordon record. We did 2 Mark Norris records, which wasn't really an outlier. I mean, because he was someone that coming up was like 5 years older or so than us. That was someone that, like, they were part of that crew that I looked up to, and the Doom Buggies and Girl Pope and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
it wasn't, to me, it still felt like within the family, and we were, playing on that. But you could call them a slightly, like, kind of the outliers, where they just have these sort of one-offs where you're like, oh, where did that come from?
Yeah.
So, there's our in for expanding the roster right there. We're like, oh, yeah, we have done that in the past. So
Yeah, there's precedent.
yeah, there is. So there we go. Everyone listening, send us all your stuff. The doors are wide open now that we've
I love that. 'Cause
discovered that.
the idea, too, is that there's a little bit of the DNA of the friend group still in those one-off outliers, if you will. And so, yeah, if you kind of stick to that mentality, things could easily come and be absorbed and sort of, run through your filters and come out and
Yeah.
for anyone in need. So, yeah, we'll link it in the description and all that.
Yeah.
Coming to the close here, I want to just touch on one thing. We're at the 20-year. Did you guys do a 10-year anniversary?
Yes. That was Mac McGuire, if you remember. Do you remember that
Yeah.
Herd Fest he did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Buffalo Blog.
Yeah,
like
the Buffalo
citywide
Blog
thing.
Yeah. That actually just coincidentally was when it was our 10-year anniversary. So that show was that. Because I remember we had, like, the table out with, like, as many, records from everyone as we could dig up,
Yeah.
from the crates, like Old Sweet, everything, like, from that era. Yes. So, so here we are again.
Yeah, here we are again
Yeah.
for the second decade.
Yeah.
And maybe we could drop some info about the show. It's at the Cave, right? Is it the 15th?
16th.
16th.
Yep.
Okay,
Saturday
November
the 16th. Expecting it to start about 7:45. We're doing it. There's 8 bands playing. Don't be afraid. We're doing it like a review style where it's going to be sort of quick 15-minute sets from everyone.
Oh, cool.
Up and off to get through as many as we can without, dragging down the night. Sleeping Kings of Iona are getting back together for the show. Strange Acres is doing a show, and the Sweethearts are getting back together to do this sort of last chance to sort of kind of close the book. It's 20 years. Let's at least do this one more time while
Yeah.
we can. And so that's what's going on.
And tickets at the door, is that, or do you buy them in advance? Or?
At the door at the moment.
Okay.
There's not an online ticket as of yet. There might be before the show happens still. I know that there was some web things going on for the Cave, so it may catch up. And but for now, just plan on tickets at the door.
Okay, very cool. And will there be a 30th anniversary?
We'll see. I hope so.
Time will tell.
Yeah. Back to, like, your earlier question when you thinking about this stuff. Part of this is definitely, like, who knows what the future holds, and not to joke too morbidly, but, like, we're all still alive and healthy.
Yeah.
We can do this. we don't look all that much different than we did. Nothing shocking, you know what I mean? So when they see us play, it's like, okay, cool. Who knows down the road, what kind of shape we'll be in. So there is, I think, can't help but feel a little bit of the like, who knows if there will be a 30th? You don't know. So I'm happy that we're doing this and that those bands are getting back together. Just in the off chance of you never know when the last one could be. So it feels special.
Like a devil, like a wedding bell. The moments that you'd never know lead you to here. With grace, if you're lucky, that's the way you'll go. If you're even lucky at all, but you leave a trace. Where you now?
And I just want to say, sort of as a closer, just how nice it is to connect. I really looked up to Harvest some. You guys really inspired me with how you were able to curate a level of quality and craftsmanship that it was just clear, like you said, when Harvest Some put something out, I could kind of anticipate this is going to be good.
Oh,
I'm going to like
thanks.
this.
That's good to hear.
And I really took that on and said, I want to hit that mark myself with the work I'm doing. So I just really appreciate everything you've done. I appreciate you're still going. I love to see that. It makes me think maybe I could get to 20. So
yeah, I mean,
thank you.
There's a lot of things that are, still going, whether it's Steak and Cake. There's what's nice about this period is some of these different podcasts and things like 1120 that are going. There is more out there now happening, trying to connect and expose the scene than there were even 5 years ago, for sure.
It does feel that way, yeah.
So I just, I'm happy about all that stuff, and I hope, just everyone in the scene just keeps kind of pushing and keeps going forward. It's easy to stop things.
Yeah.
And say, fuck it, and it's too hard or whatever.
Yep.
Or, the aggravations that, happen. But it's worth it if you keep going, because you end up having this like lifetime of, friendships and experiences that are, that you can't count, a value of. It's
legacy.
Great, so.
It's like, it's purpose. It's big stuff. It's the big stuff.
It's stuff that really matters,
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for coming in, Roger.
Yeah. Thank you so much.